17 Golden Age Hollywood actors who were shockingly short. Hollywood made them look larger than life, but off-screen. Some of the Golden Age's biggest stars were surprisingly small in stature. From legendary leading men to tough guy icons, their real heights may completely change how you see them. Stay with Hollywood Legends Remembered as we reveal 17 shockingly short Hollywood actors. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney could dominate a movie screen even though he stood only about 5 feet 2 inches tall. In an era when Hollywood increasingly favored tall, broad-shouldered leading men, Rooney built one of the longest careers in film history without ever fitting that physical mold. His height was especially noticeable once the child star of the Mickey Maguire shorts grew into an adult, but his extraordinary energy often made him seem much larger on screen. Rooney became a sensation at MGM as Andy Hardy, playing the energetic American teenager across a hugely successful series. By the late 1930s, he was working alongside Judy Garland in films such as Babes in Arms, earning a Best Actor Oscar nomination while still only 18. The Academy had already honored Rooney and Deanna Durbin with special juvenile awards in 1939. Would you ever guess from his enormous screen presence that Mickey Rooney was barely over 5 feet tall? Rooney himself was very aware of his stature. He later admitted that being short bothered him and that he sometimes compensated with an outsized personality. The contrast became particularly visible beside his first wife, Ava Gardner, who stood several inches taller. Yet height never defined the limits of his career. Rooney earned 4 competitive Oscar nominations, and in 1983 received an honorary Academy Award recognizing 60 years of memorable performances, and ultimately worked for nearly 9 decades. Mickey Rooney may have been one of Golden Age Hollywood's shortest major stars, but few actors of any height ever occupied the screen with more restless energy. Frankie Darro. Frankie Darro could race horses, perform stunts, and carry an entire picture. Yet Hollywood kept confronting him with one physical limitation: he never grew much beyond the size audiences remembered from his youth. As an adult, Darro stood only about 5 feet 3 inches tall, or roughly 1.60 meters. His World War II draft registration was slightly more specific, recording him at 5 feet 3.5 inches and just 116 pounds. Darro had entered films at only 6, and his small frame combined with a youthful face allowed him to continue playing teenagers well into adulthood. That worked brilliantly in pictures such as Wild Boys of the Road, the hard-edged 1933 Depression drama in which he played runaway teenager Eddie Smith. Would you have guessed from watching him on screen that this energetic Golden Age actor was barely over 5 feet tall? As Darro grew older, his height also shaped the opportunities available to him. Hollywood frequently cast him as jockeys, including roles connected to horse racing in the Mrs. Bradford Charlie Chan, At the Racetrack and A Day at the Races. His compact athletic build made him exceptionally useful for physical work, and he often performed his own stunts because finding doubles his size could be difficult. Darro also provided the voice of Lampwick in Disney's Pinocchio, and later moved increasingly into character parts and stunt work. At only around 5'3", Frankie Darro was far shorter than Hollywood's conventional leading men, yet his speed, toughness, and extraordinary screen energy allowed him to build a career, stretching from silent cinema into television, proving that his presence on screen was considerably larger than his physical stature. Peter Lorre. When Peter Lorre walks into Sam Spade's office in The Maltese Falcon, he hardly looks physically imposing. He is neatly dressed, soft-spoken, and noticeably smaller than the men around him. Yet within seconds, Joel Cairo owns the scene. That contrast followed Lorre throughout Hollywood. The actor stood only about 5 feet 3 inches tall, or roughly 1.60 meters, but the camera rarely made him feel insignificant. Lorre had already become internationally famous before reaching Hollywood. His unsettling performance as child murderer Hans Beckert in Fritz Lang's M in 1931 turned his round face, large eyes, and quiet voice into something audiences could not forget. After fleeing Nazi Germany, he worked with Alfred Hitchcock in The Man Who Knew Too Much before eventually settling into American films. Would you have guessed that one of classic Hollywood's most intimidating character actors was barely 5'3"? His height became even more noticeable beside larger co-stars. In The Maltese Falcon and Casablanca, Lorre frequently shared scenes with Humphrey Bogart and the much heavier Sidney Greenstreet. Rather than trying to hide the difference, filmmakers often allowed it to strengthen his characters. Nervous, clever men who survived through intelligence manipulation or sheer unpredictability. Lorre never had the build Hollywood usually expected from a leading man. Instead, his distinctive face, breathy voice, and compact frame became his advantage. Films including Mad Love, Arsenic, and Old Lace and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea kept him working for decades. At just 5'3", Peter Lorre was unusually short by Hollywood standards. On screen, however, very few actors of his era were easier to recognize. Burgess Meredith. Burgess Meredith never looked like the kind of actor Hollywood usually built heroic leading roles around. He stood only about 5 feet 4½ inches tall, roughly 1.64 meters, with a compact frame and a face that could shift from weary to mischievous in seconds. Yet once he started speaking, his size rarely mattered. That raspy voice and sharp delivery gave him more presence than many much taller actors. The contrast was especially clear in Of Mice and Men in 1939. Playing George Milton opposite the much larger Lon Chaney Jr., as Lenny Meredith looked physically small. But George was the one making decisions, controlling situations, and carrying the emotional weight of the story. Would you have guessed that the actor who could command scenes so easily was barely over 5'4"? Meredith's height never trapped him in one type of role. He moved from serious drama into comedy television and eccentric character parts. In the 1960s, he became unforgettable as the Penguin on Batman, using a top-hat cigarette holder and exaggerated laugh to turn the villain into one of the show's most recognizable figures. Then came another career-defining role, as Mickey Goldmill in Rocky. Meredith played the aging trainer who pushes Rocky Balboa harder than anyone else. The performance earned him an Academy Award nomination and introduced him to a new generation. At under 5'5", Burgess Meredith was noticeably shorter than many Golden Age actors. On screen, though, he never felt small. His voice timing and intensity usually made him the person audiences remembered first. Sammy Davis Jr. Put Sammy Davis Jr. beside Frank Sinatra or Dean Martin, and the difference was immediately visible. He was small, lean, and barely over 5'4", according to his military discharge record. Yet once the music started, height seemed to disappear. Davis danced harder, moved faster, sang, joked, played instruments, and could hold an audience almost by himself. He had been performing since childhood with his father and the Will Maston Trio long before Hollywood made him part of the Rat Pack. By the 1950s and 1960s, he had become one of America's most recognizable entertainers, appearing on Broadway television and in films, including Ocean's 11 and Robin and the Seven Hoods. Would you have guessed that a performer who seemed so commanding on stage stood only around 5'4"? Davis was well aware of his size and often joked about it himself. His slight build became even more noticeable when he stood among the taller men of the Rat Pack, but it never stopped him from being treated as one of the group's central attractions. Physical presence, however, was only part of what made him distinctive. After losing his left eye in a 1954 automobile accident, Davis continued performing with a prosthetic eye and maintained an exhausting schedule. At a time when Hollywood leading men were often sold as tall and traditionally imposing, Sammy Davis Jr. looked nothing like that mold. His actual frame was remarkably small. His stage presence was anything but. James Cagney. James Cagney stood about 5 feet 5 inches tall, or roughly 1.65 meters. His compact build is easy to notice in publicity photographs and scenes where he stands beside other actors, but it also suited the fast physical acting style that became his trademark during Hollywood's golden age. Cagney grew up in New York City and spent part of his youth boxing and playing sports. His professional career began on stage, where he worked as a dancer and vaudeville performer. That background stayed visible once he entered movies. He walked quickly, used his whole body during confrontations, and delivered dialogue with a clipped New York rhythm. His breakthrough came in 1931 with The Public Enemy. As gangster Tom Powers, Cagney created a volatile character whose sudden movements and explosive temper helped define the screen gangster of the early sound era. His 5'5" frame became part of a familiar image audiences would see throughout his career. Did you realize James Cagney was only around 5'5" when watching those famous gangster films? Cagney's physical ability extended well beyond crime pictures. In Yankee Doodle Dandy, he played entertainer George M. Cohan, performing demanding musical numbers that drew directly on his years as a dancer. The role earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor. He later returned to crime drama with White Heat, giving another celebrated performance as Cody Jarrett. Cagney's actual height can be surprising because photographs rarely capture the restless energy visible in his films. At approximately 5'5", his compact stature, quick movements, distinctive voice, and intense expressions became inseparable parts of one of classic Hollywood's most recognizable screen personalities. Edward G. Robinson. Edward G. Robinson stood about 5 feet 5 inches tall, roughly 1.65 meters, with a compact frame, broad face, and heavy features that became instantly recognizable during Hollywood's gangster era. Photographs from the 1930s show exactly how small his physical build was, especially when he appeared in tailored suits and long overcoats that became part of his familiar screen image. His defining breakthrough came in 1931 with Little Caesar, as Caesar Enrico Rico Bandello Robinson created a gangster who spoke quickly, watched everyone around him carefully, and seemed constantly ready for confrontation. The film made him a major star and established the hard-edged screen personality that followed him for years. Did you realize Edward G. Robinson was only around 5'5" while watching him command those classic crime films? Robinson's stature remained visible throughout movies such as Five-Star Final Bullets or Ballots and Key Largo. Directors often photographed him in tight compositions that emphasized his face hands and clipped delivery rather than his overall size. His career eventually moved far beyond gangsters. In Billy Wilder's Double Indemnity, Robinson played insurance investigator Barton Keyes, bringing a completely different kind of intensity to the role. Later appearances included The Cincinnati Kid and Soylent Green, completed shortly before his death in 1973. Off-screen, Robinson was highly educated, spoke several languages, and became a serious art collector. At approximately 5'5", his height was unusually modest for a Golden Age male star. His compact appearance, distinctive voice, and expressive face became central parts of a screen identity audiences recognized for more than 4 decades. Alan Ladd. Alan Ladd was one of Paramount's biggest stars during the 1940s, recognizable for his blonde hair, restrained delivery, and compact build. He stood about 5 feet 6 inches tall, roughly 1.68 meters, and his height became a practical consideration whenever directors arranged scenes with taller cast members. TCM records that filmmakers sometimes placed Ladd on boxes or raised platforms during filming. His career had taken years to develop. Ladd spent much of the 1930s appearing in tiny or uncredited roles before receiving his breakthrough as contract killer, Philip Raven, in This Gun for Hire in 1942. His controlled performance turned him into a major star and began a successful series of films with Veronica Lake, including The Glass Key and The Blue Dahlia. Did you ever notice how carefully Alan Ladd was positioned in full-body scenes? Director Tay Garnett later recalled that during The Black Knight, 3-inch planks were sometimes placed beneath Ladd when he worked with taller actors. The technique was simple and common enough to keep his height from distracting from the scene. Ladd eventually became closely associated with westerns, especially Shane in 1953. His quiet performance as the mysterious gunfighter became the defining role of his career. At approximately 5'6", Alan Ladd had a noticeably compact stature for a Golden Age leading man. Hollywood worked around that physical reality with camera placement, staging, and occasionally raised platforms, while his face, voice, and reserved acting style remained at the center of the films. Charlie Chaplin. A tight coat, baggy trousers, a small bowler hat, a cane, and enormous shoes changed cinema history in 1914. Charlie Chaplin assembled those mismatched pieces while working at Keystone Studios, creating the Tramp almost by instinct. His actual shoe size was reportedly 5, but the character originally wore size 14 boots, exaggerating the awkward walk that audiences soon recognized around the world. Born Charles Spencer Chaplin in London in 1889, He endured severe poverty after his father's early death and his mother's declining health. Chaplin began performing professionally with the 8 Lancashire Lads while still a child, then toured America with Fred Karno's comedy company. Keystone hired him in late 1913, and within a few years he had become an international star. Chaplin stood approximately 5 feet 6 inches, although published estimates vary slightly. He often emphasized the tramp's smallness by placing him opposite larger policeman bullies and authority figures. The contrast made every escape kick and sudden reversal more satisfying. The smallest man in the scene repeatedly outsmarted those who expected to crush him. Could another performer turn a crooked walk and a bamboo cane into such a powerful screen identity? Chaplin eventually gained enough control to write, direct, produce, edit, and star in his own films. The Kid, The Gold Rush, City Lights, and Modern Times combined physical comedy with hunger, unemployment, loneliness, and social inequality. After leaving America in 1952, his re-entry permit was revoked amid political hostility. He returned in 1972 to receive an honorary Academy Award recognizing his extraordinary influence on motion pictures. Chaplin died at his home in Switzerland on Christmas Day, 1977, aged 88. Buster Keaton. A 2-ton house facade drops directly toward Buster Keaton in Steamboat Bill Jr. He does not run or change expression. The wall crashes around him while an open window passes over his body with only inches to spare. Keaton carefully marked where his feet had to remain and performed the dangerous 1928 stunt himself in a single take. Born Joseph Frank Keaton in Piqua, Kansas in 1895, he joined his parents' vaudeville act as a small child. His father threw him across the stage and into scenery, teaching him how to fall without serious injury. By 5, he was already a professional performer. Keaton eventually stood about 5 feet 5 inches, but his compact athletic body allowed him to climb buildings, leap between moving vehicles, and survive elaborate mechanical disasters on screen. How did one of Hollywood's smallest comedians perform some of its most dangerous stunts? After entering films with Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle in 1917, Keaton gained creative control over his own productions. Between 1920 and 1928, he made 19 silent shorts and 10 features, including Sherlock Jr., The Navigator, and The General. His motionless expression, later called the Great Stone Face, made the surrounding chaos even funnier. Signing with MGM in 1928 gave Keaton financial security, but cost him much of his independence. His career declined, and alcoholism complicated his personal and professional life, though he continued appearing in films, television programs, commercials, and occasional comedy roles. Interest in his silent work later returned. In 1960, the Academy presented him with an honorary Oscar for bringing immortal comedies to the screen. Keaton died from lung cancer in 1966 at age 70. Lou Costello. Before audiences knew him as a confused baseball fan, Lou Costello was risking his body as a Hollywood stuntman. Born Louis Francis Cristillo in Paterson, New Jersey in 1906, he traveled to California while still young and found work as an extra and stunt performer. One early assignment reportedly required him to double for Dolores Del Rio, wearing a wig and dress while diving from a second-story window. A contemporary 1939 profile described Costello as 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighing 185 pounds. Beside the 6-foot thin Bud Abbott, his short, round build created an immediate visual contrast. Abbott remained controlled and authoritative, while Costello bounced, protested, misunderstood instructions, and gradually exploded in frustration. The difference in their bodies was not something filmmakers concealed. It became part of the act. How did the smaller man become the figure audiences watched most closely? Abbott and Costello gained national exposure on Kate Smith's radio program in 1938. Their first film, One Night in the Tropics, followed in 1940, and Buck Privates made them major box office stars the next year. Their rapid verbal timing reached its best-known form in Who's on First, where Costello's growing desperation turned a simple misunderstanding into carefully controlled chaos. Costello's career continued through radio films and television, including Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein and The Abbott and Costello Show. His health suffered after rheumatic fever damaged his heart, and his partnership with Abbott ended in 1957 amid personal and financial pressures. Costello completed one solo feature, The 30-Foot Bride of Candy Rock, but died from heart problems in March 1959, 3 days before his 53rd birthday and several months before the film's release. Claude Rains. In his first major Hollywood film, Claude Rains was almost completely hidden from view, as Dr. Jack Griffin in The Invisible Man bandages and effects concealed his face, leaving his voice to carry the performance. Director James Whale wanted that cultivated, rasping delivery, and the 1933 film turned a stage actor into a screen star. Born William Claude Rains in London in 1889, he grew up in poverty and entered the theater as a child. His early speech included a strong Cockney accent, a lisp, and a stammer. But training transformed those difficulties into one of cinema's most recognizable voices. During World War I, he served with the London Scottish Regiment and suffered lasting damage to the sight in one eye after a gas attack. He later taught at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. How did an actor standing only about 5 feet 6.5 inches seem so imposing beside taller stars? Rains relied on diction pauses and an alert expression rather than physical dominance. He played Prince John in The Adventures of Robin Hood, Senator Payne in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and the charmingly corrupt Captain Renault in Casablanca. His performance opposite Ingrid Bergman in Notorious revealed vulnerability beneath a threatening exterior. Rains received 4 Academy Award nominations, but never won competitively. He continued working in film, television, and theater, winning a Tony Award for Darkness at Noon. His final movie was The Greatest Story Ever Told in 1965. He died in New Hampshire in 1967 at 77. Sal Mineo. A Red Sox became one of the most revealing details in Rebel Without a Cause. Sal Mineo reportedly chose it for Plato because he wanted the lonely teenager's attachment to James Dean's character to feel deeper than ordinary friendship. Mineo's sensitive performance earned him an Academy Award nomination at only 16 and helped turn him into one of Hollywood's most recognizable young actors. Born Salvatore Mineo Jr. in New York in 1939 and raised in a Sicilian-American family, he began working on Broadway as a child. He appeared in Tennessee Williams's The Rose Tattoo and later played Prince Chulalongkorn in the original production of The King and I. Mineo was commonly listed at about 5 feet 6 inches, but his slight build and youthful face often made him appear even smaller beside actors such as James Dean. Was his compact frame an advantage at 16, but a barrier once Hollywood expected him to look like an adult leading man? After Rebel Without a Cause, Mineo was repeatedly cast as troubled or vulnerable young men in films, including Crime in the Streets and Dino. His performance as Dove Landau in Exodus brought a second Oscar nomination and a Golden Globe, but strong adult roles became less frequent during the 1960s. Mineo continued working in television and theater, and also moved into directing, including a production of Fortune and Men's Eyes. In 1976, while appearing in P.S. Your Cat is Dead, he was stabbed outside his West Hollywood home during what authorities described as a robbery. He died at 37, leaving behind a career defined by 2 Oscar-nominated performances and an unusually open portrayal of adolescent loneliness. Harpo Marx. A stolen pair of scissors, a honking bicycle horn, and a coat filled with impossible objects were enough for Harpo Marx to dismantle any respectable gathering. Standing about 5 feet 5.5 inches tall, he often appeared even smaller beneath his oversized raincoat and curly wig. Instead of hiding that compact frame, Harpo turned it into an advantage, slipping beneath furniture, climbing over people, and escaping authority figures who underestimated him. Born Adolph Marx in New York City in 1888, he later adopted the name Arthur. Harpo left school early and eventually joined his brother's struggling vaudeville act. He initially delivered lines on stage, but after discovering that audiences responded more strongly to his pantomime, he developed the silent character that defined him. Although Harpo never spoke in a Marx Brothers film, he was not mute in private and occasionally surprised live audiences by speaking. Could a performer dominate a comedy without delivering a single spoken punchline? Harpo communicated through facial expressions, whistles, gestures, and his trademark horn. His wild physical comedy in Duck Soup Monkey Business and A Night at the Opera could suddenly stop for a gentle harp performance. Largely self-taught, he developed an unconventional technique that traditional musicians sometimes criticized, yet his playing became one of the most sincere parts of the brothers' films. Away from the screen, Harpo's life was quieter than his mischievous character suggested. He married actress Susan Fleming in 1936, and they adopted 4 children. His final years included television appearances and the publication of his memoir, Harpo Speaks, in 1961. He died in Los Angeles in 1964 following heart surgery on his 28th wedding anniversary. George Raft. Before George Raft carried a gun on screen, he earned his living with his feet. In New York nightclubs and vaudeville houses, he developed a fast, tightly controlled style of dancing that reportedly attracted spectators such as Fred Astaire. Raft's smooth posture, careful clothes, and economical movements later became essential to the cool gangster image that made him famous. Born George Raft and raised in Manhattan's Hell's Kitchen, he worked several jobs before settling into entertainment. Raft stood approximately 5 feet 7 inches, although estimates vary slightly. He was not extremely short, but he was compact compared with many Hollywood leading men. Rather than using explosive gestures, he remained still, allowing a stare, a pause, or a small movement of the hand to create tension. His breakthrough came as Guino Ronaldo in Howard Hawks' Scarface in 1932. Raft repeatedly flipped a coin during his scenes, turning a simple action into the character's signature. The performance led to years of gangsters, gamblers, and suspicious tough men in films, including The Glass Key, Each Dawn I Die, and They Drive By Night. Could audiences separate the screen criminal from the man who had grown up around real gangland figures? Raft's career was also shaped by roles he declined, including parts connected with the Maltese Falcon and Casablanca. By the 1950s, his star status had faded, but he later mocked his own image as Spats Columbo in Some Like It Hot. Raft continued accepting smaller roles and nightclub work until late in life. He died in Los Angeles in November 1980, closing a career built as much on movement, clothing, and restraint as on dialogue. Elisha Cook Jr. Humphrey Bogart takes 2 pistols from Wilmer in the Maltese Falcon, then humiliates him in front of his own employer. Elisha Cook Jr. plays the moment with anger, panic, and wounded pride. That 1941 performance established the screen identity Hollywood would repeatedly ask him to recreate the nervous gunman who tries to look dangerous but is never fully in control. Born in San Francisco in 1903, Cook began acting on stage as a teenager and worked in vaudeville touring companies and Broadway before settling into film work during the 1930s. Commonly listed at about 5 feet 5 inches, he had a slight build that casting directors used against larger, more physically imposing actors. His size made his characters appear vulnerable, but his tense expressions and sudden bursts of aggression kept them unpredictable. Could an actor repeatedly lose fights and still become one of film noir's most memorable faces? Cook's strongest roles were rarely conventional heroes. In The Big Sleep, he played Harry Jones, a small-time criminal who knowingly drinks poisoned liquor rather than betray a woman. In Phantom Lady, he became an unnerving nightclub drummer, while Stanley Kubrick cast him as the insecure George Peedy in The Killing. His role as Stonewall Tory in Shane gave him another memorable death scene when Jack Palance's gunfighter shoots him in the muddy street. Cook remained active for decades, appearing in House on Haunted Hill, Rosemary's Baby, and television's Magnum P.I. A stroke in 1990 left him disabled. He died in Big Pine, California in 1995 at 91 as the final surviving principal cast member of the Maltese Falcon. Donald Meek. Inside John Ford's stagecoach, Donald Meek sits among gunfighters, fugitives, and thieves as Samuel Peacock, a nervous whiskey salesman who appears completely unprepared for danger. His hesitant voice and anxious expressions made the character instantly recognizable. Standing about 5 feet 4 inches, Meek was frequently cast as timid clerks, worried businessmen, professors, and men overwhelmed by louder personalities. Born in Glasgow in 1878, Meek entered the theater as a child. His early life was much tougher than his screen image suggested. He trained as an acrobat and joined a high-wire act, but a serious fall left him with several fractures and ended that career. He then spent decades working in stock companies and on Broadway before becoming a familiar character actor during Hollywood's sound era. Which version of Donald Meek was closer to the truth? The frightened man on screen or the former acrobat who survived a devastating fall? Meek appeared in more than 100 films. He played the eccentric Poppins in Frank Capra's You Can't Take It With You, appeared in The Informer Captain Blood, Jesse James and State Fair, and portrayed criminologist Dr. Crabtree in a series of short mysteries. Directors valued his ability to establish a character quickly without distracting from the stars around him. Meek completed Magic Town shortly before dying from leukemia in Los Angeles in November 1946. I was 68. In 1960, he received a posthumous star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame recognition for an actor whose name was rarely above the title but whose face appeared throughout Golden Age Hollywood.